sound of rapid footsteps echoed across the terminal floor. A man in a supervisor's uniform, his badge gleaming on his chest, moved quickly toward Gate 13. His stern expression was a clear signal that the situation had escalated beyond control. "Bradley!" Supervisor Carter's voice was firm, his sharp eyes scanning the pilot standing with his arms crossed, a hardened look of defiance mixed with anger on his face. "What's going on here?" Bradley spun around, his eyes flashing with intensity, pointing toward the man standing a few feet away. "I won't fly with him," he exclaimed, his voice seething with fury, causing the nearby passengers to hold their breath in anticipation. Elon Musk stood motionless, his hands casually resting in the pockets of his coat, saying nothing. Yet, his cold, piercing gaze made Carter pause and take a second look. No one knew what would happen next, but the air was thick with tension, as though a storm was about to erupt. Have you ever wondered how the people who shape history face adversity? This story isn't just about Elon Musk. It's about how determination and calmness can reshape an entire industry. Stay with us to see how he turns challenges into opportunities, a lesson you can't afford to miss if you're looking to rise from difficulty. The story begins. The airport terminal echoed with distant announcements, the sound of rolling suitcases against the tiled floor, and the occasional murmurs of impatient passengers. Outside, a sleek Gulfstream sat still on the runway, its nose slightly tilted upwards, as if silently mocking the man pacing near the departure gate. Elon Musk checked his watch for the third time in as many minutes, his sharp eyes narrowing as he processed the information about the flight situation. The hydraulic line, his assistant had said over the phone less than an hour ago. The mechanic says it's not safe to fly until it's replaced. We're stuck. That line still reverberated in Elon's mind, each word more frustrating than the last. He wasn't one to tolerate delays, but when it came to safety, even he knew there were no shortcuts. A broken hydraulic line wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a ticking time bomb. "So what about the backup plane?" Elon asked, his tone calm but clipped. "It's en route to Yokohama," his assistant replied, panic creeping into her voice. "It won't be back in time, but we've arranged for a charter flight. A private jet, refueled and ready to go." Elon nodded briefly, thanking her before heading toward the new departure gate. He didn't care for the details, he cared about results. And right now, the only result that mattered was getting on a plane to Hamburg within the next hour. The meeting he was heading to wasn't just important, it was pivotal. A multi-billion-dollar deal involving Tesla's battery supply chain hinged on his presence, and he wouldn't let a mechanical failure derail it. But as he neared the small gate leading to the runway, he realized things weren't so simple. A scene of chaos was unfolding near the aircraft entrance, where a uniformed pilot stood with his arms crossed, his face contorted with anger. Behind him, the co-pilot fidgeted uneasily, glancing between the pilot and two gate agents, clearly caught in the middle. "I don't care who he is," the pilot shouted, his voice loud enough to catch the attention of a few nearby passengers. "I'm not flying him. End of story." One of the gate agents, a young woman clutching her notepad as if it were a shield, stepped forward, her voice hesitant. "Captain Bradley, this is a charter flight for Mr. Musk." "I know who he is." Captain Bradley cut her off, his face reddening, veins bulging in his neck as he pointed toward the runway. "And I'm telling you, I won't have him on my plane." Elon, who had been observing the scene from a few steps away, straightened the lapels of his impeccably tailored black jacket before stepping forward. He wasn't one to stand behind when things needed addressing. His expression was calm, almost focused, but his eyes held a sharpness that made the gate agents instinctively take a step back. "Is there a problem?" Elon asked, his voice steady and composed. He didn't shout, but the authority in his tone cut through the noise like a scalpel. Captain Bradley turned to face him, his scowl deepening. "The problem," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "is you." Elon raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Me?" the pilot confirmed, arms crossed over his chest. "I've been a pilot for 33 years, flown all kinds of people, from CEOs to movie stars. But I don't fly people like you." The gate agents exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. One of them stepped forward, her voice wavering as she spoke to the pilot. "Sir, Mr. Musk is... I don't care how much he paid." The pilot cut her off, his voice growing louder. "This isn't about money. This is about principle." Elon tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady. "What principle is that?" "The principle," the pilot said, stepping closer, "is that people like you can't own the world. You think you can waltz in here, throw money around, and get whatever you want? Not under my watch." Elon's lips curled into a faint smile, a slight smirk at the corner of his mouth. "You seem to have a lot of opinions about me," he said. "Care to share where you got them from?" The pilot's face darkened, his jaw tightening as he pointed toward Elon. "I read the papers," he said. "I've watched the interviews. You talk a big game about saving the planet, but in the end, you're just another billionaire who thinks the rules don't apply to him." Elon paused, his expression unchanged. "And denying me access to the plane you're flying is how you enforce those rules?" he asked. The pilot's nostrils flared, but before he could respond, the co-pilot stepped forward, his voice low and hesitant. "Sir," he said, "maybe we should..." "No," the pilot snapped, his sharp gaze silencing the co-pilot. "We're not flying him. End of story." The tension in the air was palpable. A small crowd had gathered, watching every movement with barely concealed anxiety. A few hushed conversations whispered through the crowd, their voices faint against the rumble of the airport. "Why doesn't he just take his private jet?" one passenger murmured, staring at Elon with curiosity and disbelief. "Doesn't he own 5 of them?" Another shrugged. "Maybe they're all in for repairs," he joked, but his tone lacked humor, tinged instead with unease. Elon turned back to the gate agents, his voice calm but resolute. "Who's in charge here?" he asked. "I want to speak to someone who can resolve this." The young woman with the notepad hesitated, her worried eyes darting between Elon and the pilot. I can call my supervisor," she stammered. "But it may take a few minutes." "That's fine," Elon replied. "I'll wait." Captain Bradley scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "You really think you can just use your power to get whatever you want?" Elon turned to look at him, his expression as unruffled as ever. "I don't use power," he said. "I apply rules." The pilot's face turned a deep shade of red, his anger boiling over as he struggled to find a response. But before he could speak, one of the gate agents whispered into her radio, her face growing increasingly anxious. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice trembling, "we're working on a solution. If you'd like to sit and wait, we'll..." "I'm fine standing," Elon interrupted with a slight gesture of his hand. His eyes never left the pilot, who was now pacing near the gate, muttering to himself. The chaos was far from over, and the crowd observing only seemed to heighten the tension. Elon remained calm, his hands in his pockets as his eyes followed the unfolding situation. Everything was high stakes, but his patience never wavered. Captain Bradley continued pacing near the gate, his frustration palpable in his muttered curses and sharp glares directed at Elon. He was like a storm cloud, always on the verge of exploding, and the longer the situation dragged on, it became increasingly clear this was about more than just regulations or aviation laws. There was something personal here. "Captain?" The co-pilot spoke up again, stepping forward with concern, raising his hand as if to stop the situation. "Maybe we should let him on the plane. It's not worth..." "Don't you get it?" Bradley snapped, turning to look at his co-pilot, his gaze sharp enough to cut steel. "People like him think they can buy anything, avoid accountability, face no consequences. I'm not letting this slide that easily." The co-pilot stopped, clearly torn between his instinct to de-escalate and his loyalty to his superior. "I understand," he said, his voice low and tentative. "But this isn't a battle worth losing over." He lowered his voice further. "This is Elon Musk, for God's sake." "And that's the problem," Bradley replied, his voice low but venomous, pointing toward Elon, who stood a few feet away, his expression calm but his eyes sharp, watching every move. You think I don't know who he is? What he's done? The co-pilot furrowed his brow, glancing at Elon before returning his gaze to Bradley. What are you talking about? Bradley sneered, his voice rising enough to catch the attention of the growing crowd around them. Oh, you don't know? Let me teach you something, he said, turning toward the gathering crowd. His anger finally erupted, his frustration spilling over into full-blown fury. He pointed directly at Elon, isn't the genius everyone thinks he is. Sure, he makes rockets and electric cars, but at what cost? Elon stood silent, his expression unchanged, though a flicker of annoyance crossed his face as Bradley continued. Do you know how many Tesla workers say they're overworked? How many people have been injured in those so-called innovative factories? Bradley demanded, his tone dripping with contempt. He talks about saving the planet, but treats people like disposable parts in a machine. A few whispers rose from the crowd, some exchanging looks while others pulled out their phones to record the scene. The gate agents shifted nervously, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation as it spiraled further out of control. And don't even mention SpaceX, Bradley continued, his voice growing louder. You think launching satellites and rockets makes him a hero? What about the environmental damage from those launches? What about the towns wiped off the map to build his facilities? Finally, Elon spoke, his tone steady but with a sharp edge that couldn't be ignored. This the issue? He asked, tilting his head slightly. You're refusing to fly me just because of headlines? Bradley chuckled, but there was no humor in it. He shook his head in disbelief. It's not just the headlines, Musk, he said, his voice rising. This is the truth. It's people like you destroying everything for profit. You talk about making the world a better place, but all you're leaving behind is devastation. So, devastation? Elon repeated, raising an eyebrow, his voice still calm but now laced with sharpness. Last time I checked, we're reducing dependence on fossil fuels and opening up new frontiers for humanity. But sure, call it devastation if you want. Bradley stepped closer, his face now just inches from Elon's, eyes burning with fury. What about the workers you fired during the pandemic? Or the whistleblowers you tried to silence? Don't think I don't know about that. The co-pilot stepped in between them, his hand raised in a futile attempt to calm the situation. Captain, please, he said, his voice tense. Don't do this here. No, Bradley snapped, his eyes burning with fury. He thinks he's untouchable, thinks he can do whatever he wants because he has money and a few clever PR campaigns. But today is not his day. Elon crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze unwavering and steady. You're entitled to your opinion, he said evenly. But you're supposed to be an expert, aren't you? Right now, you're just embarrassing yourself. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, whispers spreading quickly as surprise and intrigue overtook them. A few people exchanged glances, phones still raised, recording the tense exchange. Embarrassing myself? Bradley repeated, his voice shaking with rage. You still don't get it, do you? You think this is about me? It's about all the people you've stepped on to get to where you are now. People like you don't deserve the privilege of flying with us. Elon's lips pressed into a tight line, his expression unchanged, but a brief flicker of irritation passed through him. So if I'm not worthy of flying, he said, his voice calm, why is my company building rockets to send humanity to Mars? Because you can, Bradley shot back. Not because you should. The gate agents exchanged panicked glances, clearly unsure of what to do. One of them whispered urgently into a radio, calling for a supervisor to intervene. Meanwhile, a passenger standing behind the crowd spoke up, their voice dripping with sarcasm. If he's that bad, why don't you just let him fly and crash somewhere? Wouldn't that solve the problem? A few people in the crowd chuckled lightly, but Bradley paid no attention. His focus remained entirely on Elon, his face a mask of righteous anger. You think you're above the rules? He asked, his voice low but filled with hatred. Not today, not while I'm watching. Elon took a step forward, his presence nearly overwhelming everything around him, though his demeanor remained calm. "You're making this personal," he said, "and that's your mistake. I'm not here to argue with you. I just need to get to Hamburg. The only question is whether you're going to do your job." Bradley gritted his teeth, his fist clenching tight, his gaze locked on Elon. "I've made my decision," he said coldly. "You're not getting on this plane." The gate agent holding the boarding list stepped forward, her voice trembling as she tried to intervene. "Captain Bradley, perhaps we should wait for the supervisor?" "There's no need to wait," Bradley cut her off sharply. "This flight won't take off if he's on it." Elon remained still, his eyes unblinking, but there was a sharp, calculating light in them. "Is that your final decision?" he asked softly. "I hope you're prepared for the consequences." Bradley let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "What are you going to do? Fight the airline?" Elon didn't respond. He simply turned to the gate agents, his voice even but firm. "Let me know when the supervisor arrives," he said. "I'll wait." The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The crowd had grown larger as more passengers stopped to watch. The situation had clearly spiraled beyond control, and it was evident that no one, from the gate agents and co-pilot to Captain Bradley himself, wasn't backing down. He was prepared to fight. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as more curious onlookers gathered. They watched the standoff between the disgruntled captain and the man many recognized as Elon Musk. Phones were raised, cameras rolling, capturing every word, every tense gesture. The air seemed charged, filled with unspoken conflict still unresolved. Captain Bradley, now emboldened by the attention, crossed his arms and stared intensely at Elon. Veins stood out on his neck as he leaned in closer. His voice dropped, sharp and venomous. "Let me make one thing clear," he said, each word dripping with contempt. "I don't care how many billions you have. I don't care how many rockets you've launched or how many electric cars you've sold. On this plane, I make the rules, and the rule is you're not flying." Elon remained calm, his hands loosely in his jacket pockets, his gaze unblinking as it stayed locked on Bradley. "Interesting philosophy," he replied. Elon's voice remained steady as he responded. "Do you base all your decisions on personal grudges, or am I just a special case?" "You're not special," Bradley retorted, his voice rising enough to make the crowd let out a collective sigh. "You're just another billionaire who thinks he can do whatever he wants, and I don't play that game." "Play that game," Elon repeated, his brow furrowing slightly, tilting his head as he stared at Bradley like he was a puzzle to be solved. "I don't think flying on a commercial flight is a game." "It is a game to you," Bradley shot back, his face twisted in anger. "You walk in here, probably expecting everyone to bow down because of your name, and I'm supposed to kneel? No, not today." The gate agent, still holding the boarding list, stepped forward hesitantly. Her voice was barely audible, just enough to be heard. "Captain, Mr. Musk has a valid ticket for this flight. He has paid for the entire trip." "I don't care," Bradley snapped, cutting her off and turning back to face the agent, his face flushed with fury. "I'm the captain of this flight, and I decide who gets on this plane. I've decided he's not getting on." The gate agent recoiled, her face reddening as she looked down at the ground. The co-pilot spoke up again, his voice firm but tinged with worry. "Captain, this is going too far. We're attracting too much attention." "I don't care about the attention," Bradley shouted back, turning on the co-pilot. "If you're in such a hurry to get him out of here, maybe you should find him another flight. But as long as I'm here, as long as I'm in charge of this plane, he's not flying." The crowd murmured louder, whispers blending into a wave of disbelief and confusion. A few voices rose from the crowd. "Is that Elon Musk?" a woman near the back asked, squinting to get a better look. "It's him," another passenger answered, holding up their phone to record the scene. "I can't believe this, what's happening? I heard the captain's refusing to let him fly. Does he not like billionaires?" Another voice chimed in, skepticism thick in the air. "Doesn't he have his own plane? Why is he even here?" Elon heard the questions, and for the first time, a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He turned to the crowd, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Let me answer your questions," he said, his tone calm but sharp as steel. "My plane is under maintenance. I booked this flight because I need to be in Hamburg for an important meeting. I don't think I owe anyone an explanation for my presence here." The blunt explanation caused the crowd to fall silent for a moment, but Captain Bradley had no intention of backing down. "A breakdown?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your luxury plane finally gave out after all those promotional flights?" Elon turned back to look at Bradley, his expression unchanged. "Do you care about aviation?" His voice was calm. "You must know that a cracked hydraulic line is something no one should risk flying with." Bradley smirked. "I know more about aviation than you think, Musk," he said, his voice low. "And I also know that people like you don't deserve to share the sky with the rest of us." The co-pilot spoke up again, this time more urgently. "Captain, that's enough," he said firmly. "This is a charter flight. We have to honor the booking, or we'll face serious problems." "We already have a problem," Bradley snapped, pointing toward the increasingly crowded area and the gate agents whispering into radios. "You think I'm going to back down just because some tech billionaire bought a ticket? Not a chance." The gate agent stepped forward again, her voice trembling. "Sir, the supervisor is on the way," she said. "Maybe we should—" "No need for a supervisor," Bradley barked, his voice sharp enough to make her take a step back. "I don't need anyone to tell me what to do." Elon glanced at the gate agent, his expression softening slightly as he spoke directly to her. "You're just doing your job," he said calmly. "I respect that, but it's clear the problem isn't coming from you." The gate agent nodded, her unease clear on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Musk," she said softly, her eyes glancing nervously at Bradley. Bradley let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Playing the good guy now? Trying to win people over with your charm?" Elon turned to look at him, his eyes sharp as knives. Elon's face hardened, his voice steady but unyielding. "I don't need to please anyone," he said. "This isn't about charm. It's about the fact that I need to get where I'm going. And unless you plan to reimburse me for my ticket, I suggest you rethink your stance." Bradley stepped closer, his face now just inches from Elon's, his voice low but full of challenge. "Or what?" he taunted. "You think you can intimidate me? Go ahead. Try." Elon didn't flinch. He locked eyes with Bradley, his voice calm but firm. "I don't need to intimidate you," he said, "but actions have consequences. I believe you, with your position, will understand that." The tension between them escalated, the air thick with the potential for eruption. The crowd around them fell silent, only the sound of phones recording the standoff breaking the stillness. The gate agents stood frozen, pale faces reflecting their fear, as if ready to flee. Finally, a faint beep from a radio sliced through the silence, followed by a strange voice coming through the speaker. "This is Supervisor Carter. I'm on my way to Gate 13, about 4 minutes out." The gate agent exhaled in relief, her face softening as she took a deep breath. "The supervisor will handle this," she said quietly, almost as if trying to reassure herself, but the decision was still far from settled. Captain Bradley remained defiant, his teeth clenched, his fists tight, his eyes fixed on Elon. Elon, calm and composed, stood his ground, his sharp gaze never leaving Bradley as he observed his every move with unwavering focus. The crowd began murmuring again, whispers growing louder, no one knowing who would back down first, but it was clear neither man was giving an inch. The tension only mounted. That feeling spread throughout the airport, like an electric curtain, surrounding Gate 13. What started as a personal disagreement between two men had now turned into a public spectacle. Curious passengers stood by the windows, watching intently as the drama unfolded on the tarmac. Others stood outside, phones in hand, recording the entire confrontation. "Is this for real?" A whisper from the crowd rose. "Why won't the captain let him board the plane?" "It's Elon Musk," another person murmured, raising their phone to record the scene. Unbelievable. What's going on here? I heard the captain refused to let him fly. Does he hate billionaires or something? Someone else asked. Why doesn't he just take his private jet? Well, that must be it. Another voice softly speculated. This guy must really despise billionaires. The sound of the supervisor's radio cut through the noise, slicing into the tense atmosphere. But Captain Bradley stood, motionless, his arms crossed tightly in front of him, his stance unyielding, eyes fixed intently on Elon, despite the gate agents murmuring and providing continuous updates about the supervisor's arrival. Bradley didn't even glance at them. You know? Elon broke the silence, his voice still calm but with an unusual weight to it. This isn't just about you anymore, he said. Bradley scoffed, his lips curling into a mocking smile. What does that mean? Elon scanned the crowd that had gathered around them, the flashes from phone cameras and the growing murmurs filling the air. He looked at the people and spoke. Look around, he said. You've turned this into a spectacle. Cameras, people recording every word. Whatever you think you're proving, it won't end the way you expect. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Bradley's face, but it quickly vanished, replaced by his usual resolute demeanor. You think I care what they post online? He shot back. Let them film. Let the whole world see. I won't let you bully me. Bully you? Elon repeated, raising an eyebrow, his lips curling into a wry smile. You're the one refusing to do your job because of some personal grudge. If anyone's bullying, it's you. The co-pilot, who had remained silent beside Bradley, stepped forward, his voice low and urgent. Captain, maybe we should just let this go, he said. This is getting out of hand. I'm not letting this go, Bradley snapped, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of those around them. Bradley turned, glaring fiercely at the co-pilot, his voice icy. If you can't handle this, maybe it's you who should get off this flight. The co-pilot clenched his jaw, his eyes darting around the crowd before returning to Bradley. His voice was sharp but restrained. You're being irrational, he said. This isn't about the plane anymore. You've made this personal. Bradley pointed a finger at the co-pilot, his voice growling. Don't lecture me about personal matters, he snarled. You don't know what you're talking about. Elon stood silently, observing the exchange, his expression unreadable. But as the co-pilot prepared to speak again, a soft chime from the PA system interrupted the tension. Attention passengers. The announcement rang out, calm and clear despite the chaos below. Gate 13 is temporarily closed due to unforeseen circumstances. Please await further announcements. A collective sigh rippled through the crowd, clearly confirming what many had already anticipated. The flight wouldn't be departing anytime soon. Some muttered complaints, but most remained still, not wanting to miss the next act in this unfolding drama. Bradley let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head, then turned back to Elon. See, he said, pointing toward the gate. No flight, no plane. You can pile all your billions together and find another way to get to Hamburg. Elon didn't rush to respond. He stood still, hands in his pockets, his eyes cold and calculating, as though assessing every piece of the puzzle. Finally, he turned to the gate agent, his voice steady but firm. Where's your supervisor? The young woman hesitated slightly, glancing nervously at Bradley before responding. He's on his way, she said, her voice soft. Maybe just a few more seconds. Good, Elon replied simply, his tone unwavering, without a trace of doubt. Bradley smirked, feeling more confident with the extra time to delay. You think the supervisor is going to side with you? He mocked. You really think money will solve this? Usually it does, Elon answered evenly, his eyes briefly meeting Bradley before returning to the gate agent. But this isn't about money. It's about principle. Your captain is refusing to carry out a legal flight, and I want to know why. Bradley took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides, eyes burning with intensity. I already told you why, he gritted through his teeth. Because I don't want to fly with you, end of story. Elon tilted his head slightly, his expression calm but tinged with curiosity. So, is the reason that you don't like billionaires? Because you've read a few articles painting me as the bad guy? Or is there something else? Bradley hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He looked at the crowd, the flashes of phone cameras, the whispers, and for a moment, his resolve began to waver. But then he straightened, clenched his jaw, and stared at Elon. "You're not a hero," he said, his voice low but full of hatred. "You pretend to be a pioneer, a savior of the planet, but you only care about yourself. You build rockets, cars, factories, but you don't care about the people crushed in the process." Elon raised an eyebrow, a faint smile curling his lips. "That's a pretty good speech," he said, "but it doesn't answer my question. Why won't you let me on the plane?" Bradley's face reddened further, his frustration bubbling to the surface. He struggled to find the right words, but finally he pointed at Elon, his voice loud enough for everyone in the airport to hear. "Because people like you don't deserve to fly." The crowd gasped, Bradley's words stunning everyone into silence. Even the gate agents seemed taken aback, their eyes widening as they exchanged nervous glances. Elon remained calm, his expression unreadable, continuing to observe Bradley. "That's an interesting perspective," he said softly, "but I don't think the FAA would agree with you." Bradley let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "FAA?" he sneered. "You think they care? You think anyone cares about your temper tantrum?" Before Elon could respond, the radio from the gate agent crackled again, the supervisor's voice clear but firm. "This is Carter. I've arrived at gate 13. The gate agent visibly relaxed, her shoulders easing as she turned toward the terminal door. "The supervisor is here," she said, her voice filled with relief. "He'll take care of this." But when the supervisor came into view, his stern expression and sharp eyes scanning the scene, it was clear that this situation was far from over. The tension in the air was palpable, and neither Elon nor Bradley showed any signs of backing down. The crowd stood in tense silence, the waiting only adding fuel to the fire as the confrontation reached its peak. Supervisor Carter moved forward, his steps heavy and assured, clearly someone who had seen his share of chaos at the airport. His uniform was crisp, the silver badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the terminal, giving him a presence that commanded silence from the crowd. Carter's sharp gaze flicked over to Elon, then to Captain Bradley and the surrounding passengers, evidently assessing the situation in mere seconds. "Captain Bradley," Carter said, his voice short as he nodded toward the disgruntled pilot. "What's going on here?" Bradley stood tall, puffing his chest slightly as he pointed at Elon. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice full of righteous indignation. "This man is trying to board my plane, and I've refused him." Carter raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "My plane, Captain?" he repeated. "Last time I checked, this is a chartered flight." "That's right," Bradley replied, his voice taut. "And I'm the captain. I have the authority to decide who gets on my plane, and I've decided he doesn't." Carter glanced briefly at Elon, who remained still, hands in his pockets, his sharp but calm gaze observing the exchange. "Mr. Musk," Carter turned to him, his tone polite yet firm, "I understand there's some disagreement here." "Disagreement is one way to put it," Elon responded, his voice steady. "I've chartered this flight for an urgent trip to Hamburg. I've paid in full, arrived on time, and expected to board without issue. Instead, your captain has decided to deny me boarding without a clear reason." Carter turned back to Bradley, his brow furrowing in surprise. "Captain, is there a legitimate reason to deny Mr. Musk boarding? Is there a safety or operational issue?" Bradley hesitated, his jaw clenched as he glanced at the growing crowd. The phones were still raised, and the murmurs in the air grew louder as people waited to see where the confrontation would go. "This isn't about safety," Bradley finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "This is about principle." Carter's brow furrowed deeper, clearly taken aback. "Principle?" he repeated, his tone sharp and stern. "Captain, this is a business transaction. Mr. Musk has fulfilled his obligations as a passenger. Unless there's a legitimate reason to deny him, he is a legal customer. Bradley cut him off, his voice rising loud enough to startle the crowd. You don't understand, Carter, he growled. People like him think they own the world. They think they can do whatever they want and we're just supposed to accept it. But I'm not doing that. Carter sighed, rubbing his temples as he turned back to look at Elon, who remained silent, watching the exchange with a cool, detached curiosity. Captain, Carter said, his tone calm but resolute, I need you to be clear about this. Will you refuse to operate the flight if Mr. Musk boards? Bradley's face turned red, his fists tightening as he clenched his jaw, suppressing his fury. Exactly what I'm saying, he muttered through clenched teeth. If his name is on the list, I won't fly. Carter turned back to Elon, a slight weariness flashing across his face. Mr. Musk, he said, his voice slightly urgent, would you be willing to wait while we arrange another flight? I understand this is inconvenient, but… No, Elon replied immediately, cutting off Carter, his tone calm but the determination in his voice unmistakable. I chartered this flight because I need to get to Hamburg as quickly as possible. Rebooking is not an option. Carter nodded slowly, clearly weighing his options carefully. I understand, he said. In that case, I'll need a moment to speak with the captain privately. Take your time, Elon replied, gesturing toward the gate with a faint smile. I'm not going anywhere. Carter gestured for Bradley to step back, and the two of them retreated to a secluded corner of the gate area, where their low voices couldn't be heard clearly by the crowd. The first officer, now clearly uncomfortable, stood fidgeting, nervously glancing back and forth between Elon and the gathering passengers. Do you think they're talking about? Voice whispered from the crowd. Probably begging the captain to back down, another voice replied. He's making a fool of himself, someone else chimed in. Maybe they're trying to kick Musk off, another voice speculated. No way they let him take control, someone else said. But Elon paid no attention to the murmurs around him. His sharp eyes were fixed on Carter and Bradley as they exchanged hurried whispers. He didn't hear their words, but Bradley's tense gestures and Carter's frustrated movements told him everything he needed to know. After a few long minutes, Carter turned back, his face serious yet resolute. Mr. Musk, he said carefully, I've spoken with Captain Bradley. He remains adamant that he will not operate this flight with you on board. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd, a mixture of surprise and excitement as the passengers reacted. Elon raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smile. So, what's your decision? Carter hesitated, glancing at the crowd before returning his gaze to Elon. We're exploring alternative options, he said cautiously. In the meantime, I'd ask for your patience while we resolve this issue. Alternative options? Elon repeated, his voice calm but sharp. Let me save you some time. There are no alternatives. Either I get on this flight, or your airline will face the consequences. Carter's face tightened, the professionalism he had held on to starting to crack under the weight of Elon's words. Mr. Musk, threatening. This isn't a threat, Elon interrupted, his voice cold. It's a promise. You're running a business, Supervisor Carter. So am I. And in business, actions have consequences. Carter opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, Bradley rushed back, his face flushed with anger. I don't care what you decide, he shouted, his voice echoing through the terminal. I won't fly with him. End of story. The crowd let out a collective sigh, the tension rising as Bradley's outburst thickened the already charged atmosphere. Even Carter looked taken aback, his eyes widening as he turned back to Bradley. Captain, that's enough, Carter said, his voice sharp. You're making this worse. I don't care, Bradley barked, his face still red, fists clenched. Let him buy another plane, let him build a rocket to Hamburg if he wants. I don't care. But he's not getting on my plane. Elon tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering as he looked directly at Bradley. You should be careful what you wish for, he said quietly. You never know who might actually grant your request. Elon's cryptic words hung in the air, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. The crowd stood still, phones still raised, capturing every moment, the standoff reaching its peak. Elon remained calm, hands still in his pockets, staring at the furious pilot. His expression gave nothing away, but his eyes flicked swiftly over Bradley, Carter, and the increasingly crowded terminal, sharp with the calculation of his next move. Carter turned to Bradley, his face pale, caught between embarrassment and anger. "Captain," he said, his voice low but firm, "step aside. We'll handle this internally. You've made your point, but this decision is no longer in your hands." Bradley spun around, his face crimson, fists still clenched. "You can't take my command," he shouted. "I'm the captain of this flight. I decide who flies. And I'm the one who decides if you remain captain." Carter responded, his tone hard, authority clear in his words. For the first time, the crowd noticed the shift in the balance of power. "This is a chartered flight. Mr. Musk has fulfilled his contractual obligations. Your personal opinion doesn't matter." Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but his words were drowned out by a cold voice from the crowd. "Hey, is that an FAA officer?" Someone in the crowd pointed towards the end of the terminal. All eyes shifted to two men in uniforms, their name tags clipped to their belts, faces stern, eyes sharp. The crowd instinctively parted as they made their way toward the scene, radiating the unmistakable presence of federal authority. "Who called them?" a woman whispered. "I think it was the airline," another person answered. "This has gone too far." The FAA officers stopped a few paces away from the group, their sharp eyes scanning the tense situation. One of them stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise with practiced precision. "What's going on here?" Carter stepped up, immediately shifting into professional mode. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice calm yet urgent. "There has been a misunderstanding regarding this flight. We're working to resolve it." The FAA officer's eyes briefly flicked over Elon before settling on Captain Bradley, who stood rigid, his face tense, eyes burning with defiance. "Who are you?" one of the officers asked, his gaze now directly on Elon. "Elon Musk," Elon replied succinctly, his voice steady. "I chartered this flight. The captain has refused to let me board." The officers' expressions darkened, brows furrowing as their eyes turned to Bradley. "Captain, is this true?" Bradley hesitated, his hand clenching at his side. "I have the right to deny any passenger I deem unfit to fly," he finally said, his voice laced with challenge. "That is my prerogative as captain." "And what makes you think Mr. Musk is unfit to fly?" the FAA officer asked, his voice sharp and unwavering. Bradley faltered, the question a stinging slap to his pride. His eyes swept over the crowd, the phones recording, the whispers of surprise spreading like wildfire. "It's a matter of principle," he muttered weakly, his voice barely audible. The FAA officer's expression darkened. Further, his lips pressing into a tight line. "Captain, denying a passenger on a chartered flight without a legitimate reason is a violation of FAA regulations. If you cannot provide a valid justification, you are neglecting your duties." "I don't care about regulations," Bradley snapped, his voice breaking as he threw his hands up in frustration. "This isn't about rules. It's about standing up to people like him." A collective gasp swept through the crowd, Bradley's explosive outburst adding to the already thick tension in the air. Even Carter stood frozen, his mouth agape, unsure how to react to the words he was hearing. But the FAA officer remained unshaken, his gaze still fixed firmly on Bradley, his tone cold and unforgiving. "Captain, you are hereby relieved of duty. Surrender your license and leave the flight." Bradley stood frozen, his face draining of color as the weight of the officer's words began to sink in. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You can't take my plane." "This is not your plane," the FAA officer replied, his voice chilling. "And you've left us no choice." The co-pilot, who had been silently standing beside Bradley, stepped forward, his voice calm. I can take over, he said. I'm qualified to serve as the captain of this flight. Carter nodded, his voice tense, his face betraying the strain he was under. Go ahead, he said. Prepare the flight for departure. As the co-pilot turned toward the aircraft, Bradley could no longer contain himself. You're all cowards, he yelled. His voice choked as he pointed at Elon. This is his fault. He thinks he can buy everything, and you're letting him do it. Elon didn't rush to respond. He stood still, his hands still in his pockets, his gaze calm but unreadable, watching Bradley as he began to spiral into fury. Finally, Elon spoke, his voice soft yet sharp. I don't buy my way in, he said, but I've built enough to know that people like you are exactly why things fall apart. The words hit Bradley like a slap to the face. His expression contorted with fury, but before anyone could intervene, his rage was ready to explode. He lunged at Elon, his hand outstretched, and the crowd collectively gasped. The tension erupted into chaos as FAA officers and airport security rushed into action. Everything happened in the span of mere seconds. As soon as Bradley's hand grazed Elon's coat, 2 security officers grabbed him, locking his arms behind his back as he struggled and screamed in vain. Do you think you've won? Bradley shouted, his voice choked with desperation. You haven't won anything. The security officers dragged him away, his shouts fading into the background as the crowd erupted into applause and murmurs. Phones flashed, voices rose, and the palpable tension in the terminal began to subside. Elon adjusted his coat, his expression unchanged, as calm as ever, before turning to Carter. Is the flight ready? He asked, his tone brief. Carter hesitated, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. We just need a few more minutes, he replied. All right, Elon cut him off. Let me know when it's time to board. With that, Elon turned his back, leaving Carter, the FAA officers, and the stunned crowd behind. The tension might have broken, but the consequences of the confrontation had only just begun to reveal themselves. As security escorted Captain Bradley away, his screams echoed through the terminal, a wave of anger and embarrassment spreading, met by stunned silence from the crowd. Phones remained raised, recording every moment, and whispers quickly circulated among the witnesses, like ripples in the water. Did he really just attack Elon Musk? Someone in the crowd murmured, unable to believe their eyes. That guy just threw his career away. Came another voice. Did you see Elon's face? Someone added. He didn't change a thing, calm as stone. Elon stood near the gate, his hands still in his pockets, his expression unreadable. To the untrained eye, he appeared unaffected, but those paying close attention would notice subtle changes in his posture. His shoulders tense, his jaw slightly clenched. He wasn't angry, he was focused. Carter approached, his face still pale, hands shaking slightly as he gripped the control panel like a lifeline. Mr. Musk, he began, his voice thick with tension. I want to personally apologize for what happened today. Captain Bradley's actions were unacceptable, and I assure you that this matter will be resolved quickly and decisively. Elon turned, his gaze sharp as a knife, locking onto Carter's with laser precision. Resolved? He repeated, his voice calm yet cutting. How exactly do you intend to resolve it? Carter faltered, the weight of his worry pressing down on him like a physical force. Well, Captain Bradley has been immediately relieved of duty, he stammered. He'll face disciplinary action from both the airline and the FAA, and I believe his career as a pilot is over. Elon nodded slowly, his expression giving nothing away. That's a start, he said. But it's not enough. Carter blinked, clearly caught off guard by the response. Not enough. Elon pointed toward the crowd, where passengers and onlookers continued to murmur and film, their phones raised to capture every moment of the drama. This isn't just about me, he said. This is about everyone here. Your captain didn't just deny me boarding. He turned this entire situation into a circus. He's humiliated your airline, jeopardized your reputation, and disrupted the plans of every passenger on this flight. And now, Thanks to those phones, the whole world is watching. Carter swallowed hard, his face paling as Elon's words sank in. I understand, he said, his voice trembling. I will do everything I can to make this right. Elon tilted his head slightly, his penetrating gaze seeming to pierce right through Carter, as if trying to read his very soul. Make it right. Elon's voice cut through the air, sharp and unwavering. It's not just about firing a rogue captain. It's about making sure this never happens again. Carter nodded quickly, his face flustered, trying to appease him. Of course, he said, his voice almost pleading. We'll review our policies and retrain the staff. That's not what I'm talking about, Elon interrupted, his tone calm but razor-edged. What I'm talking about is changing the system, the accountability, and having a leadership team that truly understands what it means to run an airline. Carter froze, his eyes wide as he processed what Elon had just said. Mr. Musk? He spoke carefully. Are you implying? I'm not implying anything. Elon cut him off, his voice firm. I'm stating a fact. This airline needs a new leadership team, one that prioritizes professionalism, efficiency, and respect for its passengers. Carter opened his mouth to respond but found no words. Elon's statement hung in the air like a heavy stone, immovable and final. Meanwhile, the first officer, who had taken the captain's place, approached, his voice low yet steady. Mr. Musk, he said, the aircraft is ready for boarding. If you're ready, we can depart within the next 10 minutes. Elon turned to the first officer, his expression softening slightly. Thank you, he said, his tone genuine. I appreciate your professionalism. The first officer nodded, clearly relieved to have eased the tension. It's the least I can do, he replied. After everything that's happened, I just want to get this flight off the ground. Elon nodded once more, then turned back to Carter. I'll board the plane, he said. But this conversation isn't over. Carter nodded frantically, his face pale and his body stiff. Understood, he said. We'll reach out as soon as you're back on the ground. Elon didn't respond. Instead, he turned and made his way to the gate. Every movement was decisive, confident. The crowd instinctively parted as he passed, whispers growing louder as he walked by. He's still getting on the plane, someone in the crowd murmured. Of course, it's Elon Musk. What do you think? What's he talking about with new leadership? Came another voice. Is he going to buy the airline? Another chimed in, half joking, half serious. It's Elon Musk, of course, he's going to buy the airline. As Elon reached the boarding gate, he paused and turned to face the crowd. His voice was calm, yet powerful enough to silence the murmurs around him. I apologize for the disruption, he said sincerely. Thank you for your patience. With that, he stepped through the gate, leaving the chaos of the terminal behind. Hours later, at 37,000 feet, Elon sat in the first-class cabin, his laptop open as he reviewed the details of an upcoming meeting. But his mind wasn't entirely focused on spreadsheets and proposals. A new idea was slowly taking shape, one sparked by the events at the terminal. He glanced out the window, his sharp eyes scanning the vast expanse of sky and clouds. The airline had disappointed him, but in that disappointment he saw an opportunity to innovate, to disrupt, to create something better. When the plane landed in Hamburg, Elon wasted no time. As soon as he completed customs, he pulled out his phone and called Derek, his younger brother and trusted business partner. Derek, he said, I need you to start calculating the value of airlines, market trends, acquisition opportunities, everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Derek spoke. Why? His voice was curious but also cautious. Because it's time, Elon replied, his tone calm yet resolute. It's time to build something better, something truly efficient. Derek let out a low sigh, a soft whistle escaping him. Are you serious? Absolutely serious, Elon answered. Let's get started. Ending the call, Elon stood still for a moment in the busy Hamburg airport terminal, his sharp eyes scanning the crowded space. His thoughts were clearer than ever. This wasn't just an opportunity to build a new business. It was an opportunity to change an entire industry. He stepped outside, the cool European air brushing against his face, soothing the tension of the past few hours. Elon looked up at the sky, his gaze filled with determination. In that moment, he felt a deep certainty. His dream wasn't just about flying higher. It was about flying better, safer, and more deserving of every passenger. He knew change would never come easy. There would be doubt, there would be challenges. But Elon also knew one thing. If no one else dared to do it, he would be the one to lead. The world needs more than promises, he thought to himself. The world needs action. With that thought, he got into his car to head to the hotel, but his mind was already elsewhere, with the first draft of the plan, with the list of names who would join him, and with the vision of an airline not just serving passengers, but placing them at the heart of everything. On the other end of the line, Derek was already getting to work. The two brothers had collaborated on countless bold projects, and this would be no different. Elon knew they had everything they needed to succeed. The ideas, the resources, and most importantly, the relentless determination. Elon's story didn't end here. It had just begun. A new chapter in his journey to change the world. And as always, he wouldn't just write this story. He would live it, every moment, every step, every decision. The sky over Hamburg slowly darkened as the sun set. But in Elon's mind, a new horizon was opening, vast, bold, and full of promise. This story serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of professionalism, leadership, and the determination to overcome challenges. If you were in Elon Musk's shoes, what would you do to turn adversity into opportunity? Have you ever encountered a situation that forced you to change in order to create something better? Share your thoughts or your story in the comments. Your experiences could inspire others. If you find this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and family to spread the message of innovation, resilience, and vision. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.